สวัสดีค่ะ Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to start the next panel, but first I'd like to invite to stage Hiro Rodriguez, Senior Advisor for Keith Krach, the Undersecretary of State.
Good afternoon. My name is Hiro Rodriguez. I am the Senior Advisor to the man I have the pleasure of introducing you to this afternoon. Keith Krach is the Undersecretary of State for Economic Growth, Energy, and the Environment. The Undersecretary will be leading a fireside chat on a trusted digital economy alongside executives from the private sector and our friends from Japan. Keith recently joined the U.S. Department of State after a storied career in the private sector. He's a pioneer of multiple categories. Robotics and factory automation, where he led a joint venture between Fanuc Robotics and General Motors as the youngest ever vice president in General Motors history. Mechanical design synthesis at Rasna, which was later acquired by Parametric Technologies. Business-to-business electronic commerce as the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Ariba, which ultimately achieved a $40 billion market capitalization and today now has $1.3 trillion of e-commerce flows on an annual basis, which is more than Amazon, Alibaba, and eBay combined. And digital transaction management as the CEO and chairman of DocuSign, where he took a growing startup company in Silicon Valley and transformed it into a publicly traded market-dominating company. In recognition of his accomplishments, he's been twice named the EY Entrepreneur of the Year. He received the Technology Pioneer Award at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and just Friday, Harvard Business School honored Keith as the Business Leader of the Year. Now the Undersecretary has chosen to give back to his country. We are so grateful for his incredible energy and drive to support the work of the State Department, our partners, and achieve the administration's priorities to create lasting global economic security. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to the Undersecretary of State, Keith Krach. Thanks, Hiro.
That's what I call an overgenerous introduction. Well, I'm here to do a little bit of a panel. But before that, they've asked me to give a few remarks. And we've got some great panelists. We've got Keith, we've got TC from HP, and Terazawa-san from METI. We just finished signing their commitment to this region for $10 billion in terms of energy security. So now we're here to talk about a different kind of security, and that's digital security. And, you know, the key to continued growth and development of the digital economy and now and in the future is to support strong and open innovation ecosystems, to pursue pro-market approaches and preserve the freedom to pursue new ideas and business models. And as Hiro said in that introduction, I've spent 30 years in Silicon Valley, and there it's not just about invention, it's about innovation at scale. And the U.S. industry has continually shown the ability to adopt new technologies to drive economic growth. And as you heard, my life's work has really been focused on creating innovative companies by building high-performance teams and then empowering them to pursue opportunities they never dreamed possible. I truly believe that a team with the best people wins, and diversity of thought is the catalyst of genius. You know, two companies Hiro talked about, Ariba and DocuSign, they were all about fast, frictionless, secure global commerce. And that's resulted in a profound impact on GDP per capita, or in other words, standard of living. Also, acceleration of international trade, the health of the planet, but most importantly, perhaps, the empowerment of human capital. They were also about trust. At DocuSign, we used to say, we're not in the software business. We're in the trust business. Because people do business with people they trust. And trust is based on values like integrity, transparency, accountability, reciprocity, fairness, and respect. And I think, as we all know, there are some maligned regimes that believe they're above the rules with little respect for sovereignty of nations, property, human rights, rule of law, transparency, and sound governance. And all as I know, if people cannot participate safely in the global economy, if businesses are being robbed every time they step overseas, if other nations can cheat their way ahead in a global race for innovation, then you bet global economic security will suffer. And you bet your countries and your companies will falter. The stakes are high. The world wants all of us to lead and to protect those values because it remains a beacon of light and hope around the world. And it wasn't until I was at the State Department that I realized that there are malign regimes that have laws that say every company doing business with them in the country or otherwise, and their citizens, government has a law. All information, proprietary technology, intellectual property, and data must be handed over to the government by their citizens upon request. And I was thinking, maybe that's why some of the companies from there, they give away their infrastructure products for free. Trusted, open, interoperable, reliable, and secure internet is the foundation for a trusted digital economy. In the Indo Pacific region, the U.S. has shown its commitment through the three main economic pillars in terms of energy, infrastructure, and digital. And last year we launched Digital Connectivity and Cybersecurity Partnership, or just the Digital Partnership, as one of those three key economic initiatives. And you saw this morning where we talked about the energy EDGE program with Japan's additional commitment. We'll talk later on this afternoon. I'll join David Bohegan on stage to talk about infrastructure. And now with this digital partnership, supported ICT infrastructure projects through private enterprise-led partnerships. And the digital partnerships have provided training and capacity building across the regions in areas like cybersecurity, spectrum management, emerging technology, Internet of Things, and over-the-top technologies, to name a few. And it's just getting started. Our embassies are working with our governments and the private sector in the region to develop programs that meet our shared objectives of promoting a secure, connected, and vibrant digital economy across the region. I'm proud of the work of the U.S. and allied companies, like those who are going to soon join me on stage and what they're doing in this space, building secure networks and facilitating free data flows across borders and adding value for their customers. And also working with countries and companies on global trust standards that are based on respect for transparency and accountability, sovereignty of nations, property, resources, and local labor and human rights and rule of law, the environment, and sound practices in procurement and financing. The United States has seen tremendous economic growth in the digital economy, and we want this region to realize its full potential. And adopting these global digital trust standards is a big part of it. But this growth only happens as governments, we create a policy and a regulatory environment that allows innovation to flourish. I know from personal experience that if people don't feel their information is respected, if they don't have trust in how their data is being used and shared, then economic growth just won't happen. And I can tell you, in terms of the U.S. private sector, it's a showstopper. The ability of our individuals and companies to move personal data across borders in compliance with foreign data privacy laws is a major economic interest, not just to the United States, but for the entire Indo Pacific region. Our digital economies are not only critical in terms of driving productivity and growth of our countries, but critical to our competitiveness as allies to stand strong together. Indo-Pacific data flows are the largest, most significant international data flows in the world. Over half of Indo-Pacific data flows to the U.S., and the same flows from the U.S. to the Indo-Pacific. American Indo-Pacific consumer welfare and their global competitiveness depends on these data flows to access digital services, products, and data source from both sides of the Pacific. And all these services rely on 5G networks. The stakes for safeguarding those critical networks could never be more important. So finally, as the Undersecretary of State responsible for global economic security strategy for the United States, I'm committed and dedicated to protecting personal data and facilitating international commerce. And let me express my deepest respect and gratitude to all of you in this room, for your dedication, commitment, and hard work, ensuring that digital commerce, data, and information will be fast and frictionless and trusted between the nations in this room. I'm looking forward to working with all of you in building a global trust network for all countries in the room. So now with that, let me introduce the panelists who will join me today for a few questions I'll be moderating. First, I'd like to introduce T.C. Ning. He's president for Asia Pacific for HP. T.C. has had an outstanding career, 30 years with HP, working his way up. He's an MBA from University of California. And I read an interview where T.C. said, as he was appointed as Asia Pacific president, the core part of HP culture, which values integrity, trust, and respect, and teamwork, are the values I started with and are still present today. That really resonates with me. I'll tell you another thing that resonates with me about him. He's married, he has 5 children, just like me. And, we have a few panelists that don't have that many. I told him to get on the ball. And if that weren't enough, he also holds the rank of colonel in the Singapore Armed Services. Next is Keith Williams, CEO and trustee of Underwriters Laboratories. Keith joined UL in 2005, overseeing the world's premier safety company that offers services in over 100 countries with nearly 14,000 employees. Keith has held successful positions at GE, where he worked for 23 years, and at Medtronic. He's also chairman of the board of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, as well as a number of other boards. Finally, allow me to introduce my friend, Terazawa-san, Senior Advisor to the Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry of Japan. He was my counterpart when I first started the State Department in June, but then he got a promotion, so he's a Senior Advisor. He is a long government servant, something I truly respect, and he's devoted his career to advancing his country's interests at home and abroad. In the midst of that, he found time to earn an MBA from Harvard University. So let's give a warm welcome for this great fireside chat panel, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, I'm coming down here. Join you guys. You guys ready for some tough questions?
Indeed. Ready.
Yeah, they gave me a whole bunch, but I don't think I'll use them. Anyway, so data flows, data privacy, security. How do you balance that in today's world? Why don't we start, give us a perspective.
All right. We're very excited to participate in this event. And this topic of the digital transformation, the rise of digital data flow is a very relevant topic, especially in many industries, but especially in mine. I think, first of all, that balance, the type of challenges that it brings about. I think for me, as I run the business in the region, the big thing is with the increased digitization externally, the first thing is that it really levels the playing field. I think that it opens up another dimension where there's a low barrier of entry now for new entrants, into the industry. And because things are digital, you get competitors that are not from the traditional area showing up, and tomorrow they could be your competitor. And I think we have to be always watchful, right? I mean, that's one. Secondly is from a customer perspective, with digitization and data flowing, it also gives customers increased transparency. And therefore, at the click of a mouse, I think all of us, any company, can change suppliers because information is readily available for customers to compare. And as a result, what it means is that companies like us, customer retention becomes an even bigger topic. It's harder to do it, right? And then, of course, other topics we could talk about later on is internally, because of this, then it poses different kinds of challenges on how big companies, do this journey of change.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Thank you for that perspective. So, Keith, what do you think the challenges are for companies in this digital economy? I mean, you guys are the gold standard. Tell us a little bit about that, and how important is the synergy between what the work UL does and high-tech companies?
Well, I think to start with the point about data flow and privacy and how do you balance, the internet kind of got ahead of us in terms of the things got happening on the internet. People started sharing information before we ever started to think about privacy and security. And so we're kind of playing catch up in a way. And I think it's really probably a fool's choice to say we want to choose between data flow, use of data, and privacy. I think we've all heard the expression that data is the new oil. Well, data will transform the way the world works, healthcare, for example, education. And I think it's important that we have free flow of data. That's the only way the world's going to work. And I think it's also important that we protect privacy. And if we look at it properly, we can do both. I think from our perspective, what we learned from starting at the dawn of electricity is that if you have significant safety issues, which electricity did when it first came around in the late 19th century, there were a lot of safety issues. It really slowed down the adoption of technology. And I think dealing with the safety issues proactively can help speed up the adoption. With data flow right now, we're kind of in the middle because the internet got way ahead of us. Now we're playing catch up. Now we're concerned about, gosh, there's too much information out there. At the same time, everybody in the world puts everything about their entire life on Facebook. And it's a risk now that we're going to lose the ability to use big data to deal with some really important issues like human health. And if you think about all the human health data that's available in the world, if we had access to that in a private way, how we could change the way healthcare is delivered. So I think we have to figure out a way to do both and avoid making a trade-off which would be a lose-lose.
Right. I mean, it's a big, it is one of the questions of our time,
Right.
are those rules of the road.
Yeah.
And it's, when I think about that, I think about leadership. And Terazawa-san, when I was at the G20 in Osaka, everybody was saying, hey, you got to meet Terazawa-san. You got to meet. And I know you've been a driving force in the country of Japan on this topic. So let me ask you this, Terazawa-san. If you just had a magic wand and could do anything to move this ball forward in terms of those rules of the road to maximize global economic security, accelerate innovation, and advance peace and prosperity for the people of this world, what would you do, Terazawa?
Well, a tough question.
We'll just start with a real detailed, small one.
Just getting back to your question of the tension between free flow of data and privacy. Well, there's a tension. We don't consider that those two are conflicting with each other. In fact, at the G20 summit meeting, a concept DFFT, data free flow with trust, was incorporated in the G20 Osaka communique. What we mean by data free flow with trust is that, well, data free flow is important. Trust is necessary to enable free flow of data. So that's what we will be pursuing. But this is only the starting point. We need to put this into reality.
Yes.
One thing is that we need to establish the WTO rule on e-commerce. The WTO has rules on trade in goods and trade in service, but not on data yet.
Yeah.
We need to come up with a rule, a global rule, to establish the principle of data free flow with legitimate, limited exceptions. That's what we have to do. And with regard to the exceptions, measures to enhance trust should be there, but it should be kept at the necessary level.
Yes. And so, Terazawa-san, let me ask you this. What role does reciprocity play in terms of your thinking on trust in the digital world?
I think it relates more to the data free flow. It is important to have data free flow to maximize the harnessing of the potential of data. If a certain country restricts the data flow and enjoy the access to data of other countries, that's not really fair. I think it is important for the major members of the global community to agree with the principle of data free flow so that every country can enjoy the free flow of data while respecting the necessity to enhance trust.
Got it. That makes sense. And let me throw this one out to all of you. Where do you see the role of governments and companies in terms of defining these digital global trust standards?
If I can start first, I'll say that among other things Terazawa-san has commented, I think that this privacy framework, as the governments regulate, it needs to be fit for the digital age. I think we have a view of privacy, but with this whole rise of the digital age, I think it needs to be fit for purpose in the digital age. When I talk to the governments around the region on this topic, as we encourage the whole digitization journey and businesses to have data flows, I think that because of this concern, there's a lot of localization required in the journey. You know, store the data on a local cloud. You can't take the data out. Mainly because there are concerns around security, national security, concerns around law enforcement, ability to law enforce, and I guess also the foreign surveillance, you know, of the, if I think these kind of concerns can be solved in a very pragmatic way, then I think it can unlock. So hopefully the US-Japan agreement that we heard about would offer us some insights into how to do this in a more efficient way.
That makes sense. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I
Keith?
think there's probably two elements of it. And one is that the government has already started to take a major role in this. And I would guess anybody who's in the audience who's doing business is complying with GDPR. And so you would say that GDPR has already created a global standard, which is at least a minimum requirement that we all have to fulfill. California is working on its own privacy regulations. A lot of people are working on privacy regulations. And I think for the good of the global economy, it would be very helpful if governments could come together and agree on a consensus that would provide global privacy regulations that would be harmonized. Having said that, there's a lot of technical things that go behind it, which are either better done by the private sector or done as a public-private partnership to figure out how to deal with a lot of these more technical issues. That's done traditionally with product standards. It's both government and private sector working together. And I think on that side it's important, but on GDPR or data privacy in general, kind of the horse is already out of the barn. So I think it's important for governments to figure out how can we minimize the burden on industry of having multiple overlapping legal requirements.
Right. It's a good point.
The government has a great responsibility to enhance trust. But at the same time, the nature of the digital revolution presents us with so many challenges. One is that the change in the digital world is so fast that legislation going through the Congress or the Parliament cannot keep pace with that rapid change. Number two, the complexity of technology is going so high that it will be hard for government officials to keep up with that kind of knowledge. I assume the engineers at HP are paid 1 digit or 2 digits more than regular government officials. So it will be very difficult for us to understand and put into place the right discipline for digital trade. And third, with innovation, there are so many different approaches emerging every day. The government has a tendency to come up with a single approach, but that is inconsistent with the nature of the digital revolution. So with these kind of challenges, the government has a role, but I think it has to limit its responsibility as setting the principle or framework and letting the private sector and the industry come up with the specific measures or solutions to meet those principles.
Right.
So as Keith said, there has to be a good cooperation between the government and the private sector.
Yes.
And if I may, there's one other element which we often miss or gloss over. That is, this is a major criminal enterprise as well. And there's a significant, growing, and very successful criminal enterprise stealing data. And it used to be they would just steal your credit card information from a retailer. It's a lot more than that now. And it's a major problem that only government really can address. And it's a transnational problem. You know, it used to be if you wanted to steal my money, you had to confront me in the street with a weapon or physically threaten me. Now you can do it from your dormitory in your pajamas from anywhere in the world if you have internet skills. That's a data privacy problem that's a big one. And it's a growing threat, and only government can address that.
Yeah. And I think that's a big issue, certainly from my experience in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I've had my intellectual property stolen.
Yeah.
And inside of government, I can see the cyber warfare going on and seemingly ceaseless variations of intents, even weaponized economic competition based on that. So the safeguards, that's really been magnified in my eyes, and it threats the capabilities of nation states in particular. Terazawa-san?
Can I add one more challenge that the governments are facing? For example, privacy. All the governments agree that privacy will be an important element for trust. But each country has a very different views about privacy and the measures necessary to protect privacy. So if we let each government or each country come up with its own system or regulation to protect privacy, you would have 100 different systems. That would not be consistent with the necessity to have data free flow, and it will certainly be a burden to the global business activities. So the government, in addition to taking measures domestically, would have to work together to enhance the interoperability of different systems. We can work with OECD to come up with a better guideline, improved guideline for privacy protection. We can do it bilaterally between the EU and Japan. We have an adequacy decision to protect privacy. So with this adequacy decision, privacy-related data between Europe and Japan can go smoothly. The third approach is APEC CBPR. This is a company-focused approach. If a company is certified to satisfy a certain privacy protection level, then that company can freely send it data within the APEC member states. So the government would have that role to work globally as well.
Yes, yes. You know, if you look at the three big initiatives we're talking about in terms of energy and digital, and next will be infrastructure. And you'll hear later on today of the Blue Dot Principles, which are really an umbrella set of global trust standards in the infrastructure business. I know at the United Nations, we were part of signing it's really a set of energy trust standards at the United Nations. We were one of 8 nations that signed in terms of good governance and extracting minerals, energy from the ground. And what do you think about an umbrella global trust standard for digital that's along those lines, that adopts those principles? You know, one of the things is, and I think you all see it, there's a lot of great, you know, there's the Prague principles, right? I was just in the country of Norway 2 weeks ago. They've come up with some great things. And I think it's okay if those standards are under umbrella. And what I've seen is they might be overlapping, but they're not conflicting. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's one of those things people support where you help create. So, what are you guys' thoughts on that? What do you think, DC?
On
umbrella digital global trust standard.
No, I think absolutely. I think there needs to be some form of harmonization across these different standards in order for businesses to flourish and progress in a systemic way. I think like Terazawa-san pointed out, there could be a danger that as things propagate, you know, things are set up with different standards, and in the whole rush to digitize, and because people are protecting their local concerns, then we could end up with different standards out there.
Right.
So I think it's absolutely, from a commercial point of view, you know, something which is very necessary. And we hope forums like this would educate the governments and you know, how we could move towards that.
Right. And if you carry that movement forward, it really can form a global trust network in terms of energy security, infrastructure, digital, trade, commerce, supply chains. I mean, I think that's a great hope and a noble objective for the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you mentioned infrastructure. One good example is that for infrastructure development, now most countries are agreeing with the concept of quality infrastructure. It has to be sustainable, the life cycle costs should be low, and it has to consider about the burden of debt. Those are the part, or sustainability, those are part of quality infrastructure. And actually, in the G20 summit meeting, they adopted the principles for quality infrastructure. So the G20 members include a large number of great countries, and they are now supporting this concept of quality infrastructure with the principles to support infrastructure, good quality infrastructure. We believe the same can be done in other areas, possibly including the digital sector.
Right.
Rather than having a very rigid treaty or whatever, I think we should start with a very soft, flexible principle to govern data governance as a first starting point, including privacy.
Right. If you think about it, the most intellectual exercise is taking something really complex and making it simple. And if it's not, you can't execute on it. So I think your point is a great one. Keith, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think, we do a lot of standards at UL. We have about 1,600 of them, I think, in
and you
total.
go deep, right? You go very deep.
We go very deep. I think, on the one hand, standards are really important. You use the word trust. Standards and certification of products or services to a standard create trust. You go to a doctor has a license, they're certified by the board of whatever their specialty they are, you trust them.
Right.
You buy an appliance that has a safety mark on it, you trust it.
Right.
Standards also, although can also be used to create technical barriers to trade. And that happens for lots of reasons, mostly bad. And when that happens, it creates a situation where a manufacturer, and one we visited here in Thailand a few months ago, said, I have to make 30 different models of the same product to serve all the markets I serve around the world because the standards are just a little bit different. I guess HP has a similar challenge. And so they can be used as technical barriers to trade, which increases cost to manufacturers. It reduces choice to consumers because for some markets as a manufacturer, you might say, the market's too small, I won't go there.
Right.
And therefore it makes global trade less efficient and it helps to reduce standards of living. I think that's a real risk with the data.
Right.
If everybody creates essentially their own technical barriers to trade by having data privacy standards that really are more geared toward trade issues than they are to real technical or legal or important privacy issues, it will slow down and minimize the potential of the digital economy.
Right.
And probably HP, you see that all the time, right?
Yes. I mean, like you said, very correctly, the cost of doing business goes up substantially.
Yeah.
And in the end, the consumers are the losers, right? Because of all this.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, I think the classic example of that on a more technical side was many years ago. Terazawa-san will remember when Japan had the PHS system for cell phones, and the rest of the world was on GSM. Whenever we went to Japan, our phones wouldn't work. And whenever he left Japan, his phone wouldn't work. And it really hurt the Japanese industry.
Right.
And it hurt the global economy as well, I think.
Right. And I think on something like this, I think it gets back to Terazawa-san's point, is you've got to keep it simple. It's got to be high. And, if you think about it, those trust standards are really based upon common shared values. I think it keeps coming back to that. And you'll have, you just want to make sure you don't get too much down in the weeds in terms of technical stuff. I think we leave that up to you.
Yeah, we do that. Well, we do it with industry, of course.
But I think in the certification process or whatever, what kind of role would you see in, high-level principle-based standards that UL would, where would you like to participate?
Well, I really think developing standards around privacy would be well done as a public-private partnership. And we need government input. We need private industry input. We need input from academics and consumers and other interested parties. And having said all that, now that the legislative rulemaking is well out of the barn, government's going to have to play a big role because otherwise the biggest economy with the toughest rules will set the rules for the world.
Right. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about it that it's got to be governments of the world. It's got to be companies of the world, right? It's got to be, associations of the world, universities of the world. I mean, it's really a global thing.
Yeah, it's a challenge that will require a multilateral consensus.
Yeah.
Or we'll have lots of little pockets.
Right. All right. Well, our time is running here. Let me just ask one final question, Terazawa-san. So Terazawa-san, you guys have been doing some interesting work in terms of supplying your 5G supply chain. Can you talk about that and share that with us?
Oh, I see the remaining time becoming short, so I have to be very fast as 5G. So I have to be very fast and efficient. Whoa. I hope there's no disruption. 5G has so much potential in terms of its speed, quickness, and massive connection. So 5G will be there to support the various elements of our daily life, social lives, economic activities, and even national security. So it is extremely important that we would have total, full trust in the 5G service or the system that we use.
Yeah.
With that in mind, the government of Japan announced in December last year a new government procurement policy. In the procurement of major IT or ICT system or services, the Japanese government will go through a screening process to ensure the security of the IT system or service to be introduced. At the same time, the Japanese government required the mobile operators applying for spectrum allocation for 5G to take into consideration of our new government procurement policy in applying for radio spectrum for 5G. So this has been our experience, and for countries sharing the same concern about 5G, the importance of 5G, but at the same time ensuring the security of 5G, Japan is ready to provide technical assistance to countries which may having the same kind of concern on this issue.
That's great. Well, by the way, thank you for your leadership. All right, let me just ask one last question for everybody, and that is give advice to this audience. And so it's made up countries, companies, Indo Pacific region, U.S. If you could give them any advice in terms of the future of our digital economy together, what would it be? Keith, let's start with you.
Sure. What I would say is please try to remember that digital transformation is much more than just better, faster, cheaper for the way we already do things. I think the real meaning of the digital economy is going to be fundamental transformation of the way a lot of our industries work. And I'll give you an example in our industry. Typically, the way our industry works is you design a product, you make a prototype, you test it, then you send it to us and we test it, and then we give you certification. Well, that's all a 20th century approach. In the 21st century, it's all going to be done on CAD/CAM with a digital twin, with a simulation, with a digital modeling, and with AI. And it's going to fundamentally change our whole business from physical testing to simulation and digital twin.
Sure does.
That's a lot more. It does require a lot of data flow, by the way, but it's a fundamental change in the business model that will upend our industry, and almost everybody else will be upended as well. So I think to simply think about, oh, digital means we're going to do with computers what we used to do with paper, really misses the major opportunity of the digital transformation.
Right. Digital transformation is really a cultural transformation, right?
Well, that's right. And I think for the work we do 10 years from now, if you're a designer, it'll be built right into your CAD/CAM system, the capability to know that the product will meet the regulations for every market you want to sell it into before you've made the first prototype.
Right.
And in fact, we're just this month going to start commercializing the first applications of AI to do certification, because it's all possible.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Terazawa-san, what advice do you have for the audience?
Well, before giving an advice, this is a requirement for us. As we see innovation in the digital world, we need to have innovation in the way the government functions, as you described. So the way the government regulates would have to change as well. And the companies, as you said, would have to transform themselves. But ultimately, individual would have to transform himself or herself. We have to be prepared for the digital world. The talents we learned 20 years ago or 30 years ago, maybe at the same school, is becoming obsolete. So the government, together with the individuals, we need to have continuous education to upgrade the skills and talents to match the ever-changing digital world. And that education would have to be provided to the younger generation. So education does not end at graduation from college. It starts early, it goes on until very late in the life stage. So that's where the government and individuals and educational institutions would have to work together. Otherwise, we cannot harness the potential of digital revolution, and we will not have the support from the general public unless we ensure the people to be ready to reap the benefit of digital revolution.
Great, thank you. TC.
All right, for me, I will wrap up by sharing that even though I lead a multinational company that is very advanced in many ways, but in terms of this topic about digital transformation, it is a lot about a cultural change and change management. It's not easy. The advice I can give is that you first need to really identify the behaviors that needs changing. You also need in a company to identify the groups that will be impacted because of the change. And be able to identify exact sponsors who are change agents, train them, new skill sets are needed. And then finally, you also need, for lack of a better word, some kind of a consequence management. Now, for the people who don't want to change, what do you do with it? I think these are big topics that are not easy to answer. But whether you're an SMB, a mid-market, or a large enterprise like us, I believe these topics are really deep ones which need serious thought in order to make this change happen.
Yeah. And by the way, I couldn't agree with all of you more. In terms of digital transformation and writing the rules of the road, it's about steering that ship. And the ship's got to be moving. And a way to get it moving is quick wins. And also, there's a lot of power and strength through unity and solidarity. And that would be my message to this room right here, is the solidarity and unity is such a big strength. And it's typified by my great fireside chat panel here. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time and being on it. You guys are the smartest people I've ever known, man. And I really appreciate it. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was great.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're the